as far as the computations go, there is absolutely no reason. Actually, I had believed until this afternoon that analog computers were completely gone. Apparently, the Wikipedia article on analog computing mentions a couple that are still in existence that are used for some experimental purposes. But anything that you can do with it, you could simulate with a digital computer and do it more accurately. So it's not really the computational part that I think is a problem. It's more of the psychology that we have that turns everything into digital.
Right. Okay.
And it makes the medium, bits are invisible. That bothers me too. More and more, the medium itself is disappearing. I mean, most people don't even have CDs anymore for music. It's all downloads.
Right.
It's what is it? A download is a piece of memory.
Mm-hmm. So we're losing touch with nature.
I think so. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't, evolved this theory to a great extent, and I don't have any answers or stuff. I'm just raising a few questions or a few little, it's just stuff that's kind of peculiar.
Well, it's very relevant. I mean, when you think about the dating sites, right? Okay?
I don't have experience.
Well, look at, and there's a really good YouTube rapper that I put on my Facebook page a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how we've lost touch with reality through computing, because how many friends do we have on LinkedIn or on Facebook? We really, how many are your really good friends? And the whole way the world is interacting, you don't have to remember anything. You just look it up on your cell phone or whatever. So you are losing touch with reality and the real world, and there is something more to life than bits. I don't know if that's anything where you were going for.
I think that in the future we're going to see people deliberately reject digital technologies in certain fields of art. Mostly music, I think. I think we will begin to see a lot more musicians and composers using acoustic instruments, hand-built instruments, unusual instruments from around the world, and perform without the benefit of any electronics. Electronics hasn't really entered into painting or sculpture, but you can see that people often reject the idea of digital media and written media with things like poetry slams and all that where it's a performance, it's live, it cannot be recorded. It could be recorded, but it doesn't really work in a recording. It works in a live setting. So we may see a lot more of that, and as an alternative to what is feeling like a very antiseptic type of digital media.
Okay. That certainly gives everybody a lot to think about, I believe. It does me, anyway. So at this time, we're going to take some questions. Well, I want to ask you one last question. Yes. Pardon me. So what are you going to be doing in the future? You just came out with the new Windows 8 book, and I congratulated you earlier, but I want to congratulate you again in front of everybody that has attended. We all can't wait to read it. Of course, Kevin Stump here. Danny couldn't make it. Okay. He's a senior engineer at Internology, Tim Huckabee's company, and they are teaching everybody classes on Win8RT, a series of 12, is it 15 or 12?
It's 12 sessions.
12 sessions that span many months, and it's hands-on. These guys are there answering questions, and so, and it's been very, very popular, and these guys are doing a great job. So, there's been the question come up, where your name has come up many times in their talks. Like, oh, if you don't understand capital N name, wasn't that it? And lowercase name, then get Charles's book on, I think it was on Windows Phone. He does a great job on that. Or maybe it was your WPF book. But, everybody's really anxious to...
It's more when I talked about the WinRT API, because back in the days, 15 years ago, you needed to, like I did, I read your book, Programming Windows, so I understood the Win32 API and everything. Back in the days, you really needed to understand the guts of Windows in order to develop a functional application, but these days, you don't need to do that necessarily anymore. You can open up the WinRT API, go to the namespaces, and they are all self-explanatory. And you don't, that's basically when I mentioned your name and said you don't need to read a 5,000 pages book.
It's a different approach that I've felt myself taking over the years. Now, when I worked on the first couple editions of Programming Windows, I felt as if the developer really needed to know more about the internal architecture of Windows and the messaging system and the graphics system and all like that. And these days, some of that information may actually be harmful to you because it may change. That's one reason. It may be different on ARM processors versus Intel processors. So we really should be. We really should be coding for the API instead of coding for what we think is happening underneath the API. And yeah, there are many reasons why tutorials, book-length tutorials, are becoming more irrelevant. In that you can bring up Visual Studio and you get a working application right off, and you can try things to a point where you get stuck, and then you just Google a function name, and you get information about it, and people talking about it, people doing blog entries on it, people on what's that Q&A site? That's Jeff Atwood's site. And so why is there any purpose to a book length tutorial these days? I still think it's valuable to have a book that takes you through the API starting at ground zero and takes you through in a course where you hit a lot of the stuff and that you can do in a progressive way. And I know, so I still write books in that way, and I know absolutely people don't learn in that way anymore. And it's one reason. I mean, book sales have just plummeted in recent years. So you're asking me what I'll be doing this year.
What's in store? What's
in store for me this year? After you get done with a book, you're pretty much in a state of poverty, because you've been spending an enormous amount of time writing this book and making very little money. And so you can hope that in the people, after the book comes out, lots of people actually buy it, so you get some income from it. But if not, which is the normal case, I'll probably be doing a lot of consulting this year, so that I can get myself back into a state of fiscal responsibility. It's too bad, because I love writing books. I'll tell you what, for me, it's a great way to learn the API.
Oh yeah.
Because you understand it you have to learn it in a very methodical way, because you have to present it in a very methodical way. So you have to think about a lot of the ways in which the APIs interrelate and all. So it's been a great learning exercise.
it was fun doing this presentation because even though I had experience in 3D programming in XAML and wrote a book on the subject, and I had some experience in 3D programming in XNA, which I didn't write about, but I wanted to. I had never done any 3D programming in Direct3D, which is at the basis of both these things. And man, it is a lot harder than it's, wow. There is just so much code, so just do the littlest things. And it's kind of weird because later on this year, I'm supposed to be writing some articles about Direct3D programming for MSDN Magazine. I have the slightest idea how to do this. To condense this down to magazine articles. I don't know. It's going to be occupying my head for a while. I don't know. But it was kind of fun doing the 3D, and when you're doing it in Direct3D, you pretty much can stop worrying whether you're going to hit a point where the performance is going to go crazy, like in which happens in XAML all the time when you're doing 3D. So there was that comfort.
Great. I think Jeff had a question back there.
Yeah, I'm going to, I think, wind you up a little bit. You mentioned earlier with the differential and the intuitive sense that people get with compound interest and so forth. I'm curious if you see the same kind of thing in our industry with programmers. Some folks go out and they're the binglers, right? They don't actually learn the theory of anything. They find an example of something and they tweak it. Then there's the folks that actually sit down and read the 500 pages, start to finish, to try to get a mental model of it. In your consulting, do you see...
Yeah, I did some, a couple years ago, I was at a company in New York where we were doing a WPF app for traders. And it was interesting that some of the programmers, the WPF programmers, didn't know how to create controls in code. Because, usually you do it in XAML. And so if they needed to do something like that in code, it was like you could just do new button and add it to the collection. It was very peculiar, and particularly when writing about the XAML-based environments, which I've done several times, I guess now, I like to do code and XAML solutions. In fact, my WPF book was kind of controversial, and that the first half of it was entirely code, and then introducing some XAML. I think that was a wrong approach for me to take in that book. I will admit it.
Maybe for sale.
But yeah, there are developers who learn by bits and pieces, and I don't think it's a good tendency.
They tend to make digital mistakes.
Yeah.
Analog mistakes tend to be little.
Yeah.
Little input, little output. Digital, you make a mistake, and it's like the $4,000 grocery bag.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, you have a question?
Well, I have a comment. 20 years ago, when a piece of fiction, the person said that the human race was so amazingly primitive that they still thought digital watches were a neat idea. So going back to your theme of, thinking outside the fence.
Yeah, we don't use digital watches anymore. How many people have analog watches and how many people have digital? Analog?
Both got stuck on
This is my watch.
Yeah, exactly.
On the phone, 825. Okay. It's like a pocket watch, right?
Yeah, right.
That was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That wasn't even like yesterday.
You know what? Recently, somebody one of the guys who invented the Etch-a-Sketch died, I guess. Yeah. And was it the New York Times showed a photograph of not the original Etch-a-Sketch, but the stupid Etch-a-Sketch that used a LCD screen.
Oh, brother.
And I mean, oh man, and that is just dumb to make a digital Etch-a-Sketch like that. Yeah, I could see an Etch-a-Sketch program on a tablet, but that
When
was.
you talk about sine waves, back in the 80s, I was working as an automated test engineer. That's how I got into software. I was actually a double E before I got into software. And, you know, they had a sine wave from a DAC, a digital to analog converter.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there was an error, it would spike. You wouldn't get a sine wave. And the engineers who were building the stuff that I had to test told me it was impossible to write a software to test that curve. I go, just give me the formula. I mean, you know, I can test a curve, I can test every point in that curve, you know, the computer, but the engineers thought the only way you could test it was to visually have a technician visually look at the oscilloscope and see if there was a spike or not.
Interesting.
They couldn't believe it can be done by software. It just goes along with the sine waves and the whole differential.
Actually, wait a minute. See, if you have an analog digital converter, and if that spike.
Digital to analog is actually going the other way.
All right. So the spike is being generated in where's the spike coming from?
The spike has been coming from because there's a hole in the digital analog steps where it just pegs either up, you know.
Oh, in the converter itself.
The converter itself. That's what we're testing. We're writing software to automate test the hardware.
So you'd need to run that analog, the analog signal back into a ADC.
So digitize an oscilloscope, take the data out, and run that through a formula to see if there's a side parameters. But the engineers, electronic engineers, would say it can't be done. The only way you can physically do it is.
See, what I was going to say is that if that spike is beyond is higher frequency than the sampling rate, then you're not going to get it back into the computer that way.
Right. From the digitizing scope, you would.
Yeah.
So that just, you know, it would take the sine wave, and you'd actually see, you know, the spike, back to the sine wave.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, does anybody else have any
FFT,
questions?
you'd see it on all frequencies.
Yeah.
You got an impulse.
We can take a few more, and then we're going to move on to the autographs. Yes?
What language did you use to create your gears?
It's all Direct 3D in C++.
How long did it take you to do that?
I think I worked on this. It's hard to tell how much. I worked on the entire presentation like in the past 2 weeks, I think. That sounds about right. This is the second time I've done. I actually have an hour presentation about the tide predicting machine that I did some 2D graphics for, but I did it in I did like the entire, instead of using like PowerPoint for part of it, I just coded the entire presentation in XAML stuff, and so I did the same thing here basically. A lot of it's XAML. All those pictures are trivial and stuff. That 2D graph and stuff like that, that's a combination of XAML and code. The two 3D scenes were done entirely in Direct 3D, but just for convenience, the whole program was done in C++. And so it was a combination of not only coding it, but writing the talk as well and stuff like that. I think like 2 weeks. 2 weeks of very hard work. But fortunately, I mean, I had 3D programming experience from WPF. And I did a book on 3D. So a lot of the concepts were very familiar. It's just that in Direct 3D you need just like tons and tons of code. Fortunately, that code, a lot of it's just boilerplate, and you can lift it from other sources. But I don't want to show anybody this actual code. It's just terrible. The program, it's really like like they always say, after you finish coding something, it's like a first draft, and you should just start over from the beginning because you've learned so much how to structure the program by writing it, and that's what I need to do with this 3D stuff before it's suitable for other people to see.
Kevin?
Maybe another Outlook question. What do you think, how much easier is it going to get to develop software? Because a little bit similar to my previous question, 15 years ago it was pretty hard to develop sophisticated software. And these days, really, you can just drag and drop. You don't have to know
it's
a lot.
interesting.
Where's it going to go?
Yeah.
One class with one method, do it?
I think the introduction of markup into our program with our programming languages has done a lot to simplify that stuff, and we can now take a lot of remove a lot of that UI stuff away. Things like the retained mode graphics of Windows 8 and Silverlight and WPF helps a lot too, because we can just have visual objects. We can treat it more like just have visual objects that exist all the time, and we can modify them and they change appearance. So I did find, but in Windows 8, it was nice to see that they took this XAML and C# and VB stuff from, that we've been working with from Silverlight and Windows Phone and move it into Windows 8, and it becomes a full-fledged part of the Windows API. And at the same time, DirectX was elevated to a much higher position. And I'm finding this duality very interesting, because at the same time DirectX is being elevated higher, the WPF3, the 3D stuff in WPF never made it into Silverlight or Windows Phone. XNA was this nice managed framework on top of DirectX, and I speak of XNA in the past tense, even though it still exists, but Microsoft has basically stopped that. And it's like this realization that if you're going to do hardcore graphics in 3D, you don't want any type of wrapper around it. You don't want to use XAML. You don't even want to use XNA. You want to get down and dirty with it. So it's an interesting duality that a lot of the stuff's becoming easier with the markup, whether you go the XAML route or the HTML5 route. But then, if you want to do something high performance, you're going to have to really get into that really ugly C++ code,
Wow.
And it was interesting to me because I've been doing XAML now for a long time, about 10 years, because I started with a beta version of WPF when it was called Avalon, and it was nobody else had really, not too many people outside Microsoft had seen it, so doing some DirectX stuff has been more of a challenge to me. I'm doing a column now for MSDN Magazine called DirectX Factor, and there's been 2 issues so far where I've done stuff with audio, and I'm doing like 4 more on audio, and in the March or April issue, there's going to be like a turntable thing where you can load in something from your Windows 8 music file, and you have this turntable that can turn at a constant rate, and you can increase the speed, or you can go into negative speed, or you can grab it like a DJ and twist it and stuff like that. And it was so fun to write, and it was one of these things where you really need to have like this intimate relationship with the sound bits coming through in order to do this manipulation. And it's hard to conceive of a platform to do this other than DirectX. So I've been having fun with DirectX, and even though DirectX looks like really a young person's programming environment, but I've been having fun with it.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions, and then we're going to start the autographs. And I want to, while Gary is taking Mr. Petzold into the autograph room, which is right by the exit door.
Autograph room?
Autograph room? Yes. And
Can I sign the walls?
Absolutely. I don't think we get in trouble for that. They're all glass. But and then I'll explain to you the process. We'll take two more quick questions because we're running out of time. And of course, Braden.
Actually, I think Derek, you have a question?
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, what is the smallest integrator that you can imagine? Can you imagine one so small that a digital computer could program it and operate it?
That would be interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff done recently with like micro components and stuff like that. That'd be. I have no idea, but it's an interesting idea to try to miniaturize an analog computer like that. It's hard to imagine somebody doing that as a hobby, for example. I mean, once I started doing this, designing these gears and stuff in 3D, which is kind of fun in itself, I realized, geez, I mean, I should buy a 3D printer at this point and just, once you have the geometries of these things, you can just print them, and I don't know. I can really see this as being a real suck of my time. Oh, man.
So actually, I did have a quick question. So think outside the bits. You've been programming Windows for a while. Some of us program Windows on a day-to-day basis or other platforms. How would you apply, thinking from your programmer mindset, how would you apply think outside the bits to what we do on a day-to-day basis?
Good question. Here's the summation of this talk.
Don't make a digital Etch-a-Sketch. I don't know. I have to. I mean, I violate this rule all the time. I mean, I just got done talking about this DJ simulation where you can turn the record on the screen and it plays forwards and backwards and stuff. I mean, that's it. It's why not get an actual turntable and do it if you want to do that? I don't know. It's just. It's real. This is for me. I need to.
Okay. And John, I'm sorry for everybody else, but we only have time for one more question.
We have smartphones and tablets. What things do you see new coming out after that? What things?
I'm not a good prognosticator. But there is a problem of shrinking the computer even further than the phone because of the touch screen. And I think touch is going to be a very long, it's going to be around for a while. And I think a touch is going to be on all our computers. It may necessitate a change in what we think of as a desktop computer. But the tablet and the phone seem like very solid type of paradigms to me. And the phone's nice to carry around in your pocket, and the tablet's nice because of the extra space. And so I don't see either one of those disappearing. And there's other types of human interaction that people have posited, but just have not really worked well, like voice. It's not that it doesn't work well. It just doesn't seem to have caught on in any way. My wife has an iPhone, and she used to talk to it all the time and have it, have nice conversations and all. And she's actually seemed to have stopped doing that. It's gotten to be where she just prefers typing a text rather than dictating it, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting when seemingly advanced technologies are faddish for a little while, and then they're kind of rejected. And it's possibly because they're too new or some other reason. There's like a plot twist at the movie The Man Who Fell to Earth, that these technologies that he had introduced to Earth to make him a lot of money just became people. They were too new for people, and they just were rejected eventually.
What do you think about Connect?
What's Connect?
Connect,
What?
you know, the K?
Oh, the Xbox thing. I don't know. One of my big problems in I am not a gamer, so there's like lots of stuff that I
Yeah, okay.
and Connect is something else that looked like it would be really fun to play around with. I'm not thinking outside the bits here. Yeah, to do musical instruments and stuff with picking up finger movements and all. So.
Okay.
What's wrong with playing an actual musical
Right,
Nothing at all.
right. That's real life. Okay, well, thank you so much. So, Gary, if you'll take Mr. Petzold into the autograph room, I'll explain to you guys what's going to happen next, okay? Do we have the